guys, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and today we're talking with a photographer who is doing something that I don't think any other photographer is doing. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to interviewing world-class photographers to ask them the questions you want answered. Whether you want to be the world's best wedding photographer, family photographer, pet photographer, or you just want to take better photos of your kids growing up, we will get you to start taking better photos today. Here with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodgers fan, and award-winning Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening into today's podcast. I'm super excited for today's episode. We're talking to a photographer who, again, is offering something that I don't think any other photographer is, and might be something to look into. So we're definitely going to get into that. But first, a little update on my life. About a month or so ago, I brought up that I was trying something new in terms of marketing that was super high risk, high reward. I had no idea how it was going to turn out, but I needed to seek professional help to create an ad for me, right? It was I was looking for somebody to help write me an ad. I didn't really go into it too much because I still wasn't sure if I was actually going to do it or not, but I wanted to entertain the idea. Well, I did decide to go ahead with it, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it now. So my idea was, and I've had this idea for a long time, I just never acted upon it, was that I wanted an ad where I tell brides that I don't want to shoot their weddings in the hopes of them booking me to shoot their weddings. So obviously that doesn't make sense. How are you going to do that? Why would that work? Why would any bride, book you for their wedding if you say that you don't want to shoot weddings? Well, obviously it would be humorous. It would be, a form of entertainment. The premise behind it is that I tell them that I didn't get into weddings because, I love fairy tales and, magical days. I got into weddings because I love eating cake. And it's the only job that I could think of where every day where I'd show up, there would almost be a guarantee that there would be cake there, right? So it's definitely based upon humor, and I'm trying to get a laugh out of my brides because my bride, my ideal bride, I guess, is she makes fun of herself. She likes to laugh. She enjoys humor and sarcasm as well. Like, she understands that watching the video that's kind of absurd, and that's what's funny about it. So I made the video, and it turned out to be a huge hit. So in the first day alone, I got over 2,000 views on my video, and that was just organic reach on Facebook. That wasn't me paying for Facebook to boost the post at all. So it got a huge, massive jump start. And then the next day, I started an actual ad campaign where I'm paying Facebook, obviously, to show my video to more brides. So it's like a little, commercial. It's only about a minute long, minute 10. And again, it turned out fantastic. So the first day I got 3 leads from brides who wanted me to shoot their wedding or wanted more information. And then it's been 3 days since then, and I've got a total of 3 more inquiries. So that's an average of 1.25 a day. And that is a massive success. So anyway, if you want to see an example, I'm going to put a link to the video in the show notes, so head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and then check out the show notes for this episode, and the video will be there. Check it out. I think that it is a blast. Next thing I want to talk about is that I talked about this last week, is that we've started a Facebook group just for listeners of the podcast, and I would absolutely love for you to join. Once again, head over to the show notes of this episode, and I'm going to put a link to the brand new, and this is a private Facebook group. It's closed. If you search for it, you're not going to be able to find it. You have to go through the link for me to add you to the group. And it's really a spot for newer photographers to be able to ask questions and, solve problems and share their wins that normally they wouldn't have anywhere else to do so without any sort of judgment or rudeness, because there's a very strict 100% absolutely no rudeness policy, and I'm going to strictly enforce that. So I would love to see you in the group, say hey to other listeners, and help grow your photography. Learn more. What's wrong with that? That's why you're listening to this podcast, is to grow more. Why not also do it in a place where you already are anyway, and that's Facebook. So head over to the show notes again for this episode. That's beginnerphotographypodcast.com. Also, while you're at beginnerphotographypodcast.com, if you guys are buying anything on Amazon at all, I mean, Amazon has everything these days, right? You don't even have to leave your house. They got toilet paper, they got coffee, they got, cereal, they don't have milk, but just about everything else. They even sell coffins, I believe. All of your computer needs, all of your camera and photo needs, everything that I buy is essentially through Amazon. The only reason why I go to the store anymore is for fresh produce. That's it. If you could help out the podcast by heading over to the website, there's an Amazon link right there where if you click on it, you can buy whatever you're going to buy on Amazon anyway. It doesn't cost you anything extra. You just go about your normal business, and Amazon will give us, the Beginner Photography Podcast, a cut. And it's not much, but it really helps out the podcast because it does cost a lot to keep the podcast going. It is a huge, huge, huge time investment. And I would just be so grateful for you to, go ahead and just go through our link on Amazon. Like I said, it doesn't cost you anything extra. All you do is you just click on the link and Amazon takes care of the rest. And then you would feel good about yourself for helping support the podcast that has helped you grow and that you listen to every single day, because I know that you listen to it every single day, right? Anyway, all right, let us go ahead and get into today's episode. Like I mentioned earlier, it is with a photographer who is doing something that I don't think any other wedding photographer is doing, but I guarantee that you've heard of it before. It's really interesting. So that's it. Let's just go ahead and get into today's interview with Timothy Faust. Today's guest is a photographer with over 15 years of experience, starting out as an editorial photographer, shooting for publications like National Geographic. Colorado-based wedding photographer now, he has come up with a unique way to guarantee that his couples will love their photos, and I want to dive into it, but first, Tim Faust. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Tim.
Raymond, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, I talked a little bit about your start in photography. Can you fill me in even more in your beginnings of how you got started, I guess, as an editorial photographer?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I actually think I really got into it accidentally. I know a lot of people, get into photography as kind of a hobby when they're younger and that kind of stuff. I was actually in my early 20s at the time. I was spending a summer as a raft guide in Georgia. And this was, back in the late 90s, maybe early 2000-ish. I can't remember the exact year, but we'd go whitewater rafting every day, and there'd be people out on the river in kayaks, and they'd be out photographing us, and they'd take some pictures and then paddle on ahead and take some pictures and paddle on ahead, and then they'd sell the photos to the guests on the boat, the tourists. And I thought it was really neat, and I wanted to get into it, so I went down to a pawn shop in town, bought an SLR and a couple of lenses, and then went down to the library and checked out a book on how to operate a camera, because I had no idea. Up until then, I just had like a little point and shoot, and obviously like that, back in the day. I mean, this was almost 20 years ago now. Point and shoots were pretty terrible when it came to like shutter lag. So you could try to take a picture of someone in a kayak going over a waterfall, and you get the back end of their boat sticking out of the water because they've already like gone off the waterfall and have disappeared. So
you're not selling those photos.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, I really should get an SLR, but I had no idea how to use it, and that's kind of how it started. Got into it that way, and 2-3 years of using that camera to kind of photograph my quote unquote adventures, traveling and kayaking and backpacking and that kind of stuff. And suddenly I got the idea that it could be like a viable career option after a while. I did upgrade cameras from the 1970s.
Oh, wonderful.
I found for like $50, but it's that's kind of how it started. And then I just kind of fell into it like pretty much by accident from there.
So how did it go from I'm going to sell a few photos to some tourists like rafting down the river to working for larger publications like National Geographic?
Yeah, and again, that wasn't that was pretty accidental as well. In college, I was running like outdoor trips for my outdoor center there, and I would take pictures on the trips, and then those pictures would get used in publications, like partly for our brochures, but then the college would also use them, and that's kind of where I got the idea that there might be some way to kind of turn this into a little bit of a side job. And I think the real big carryover wasn't until I'm trying to think exactly how it worked out. I ended up going out to the Brooks Institute in California, which I think just closed in the last year, but went out there and took a few classes and thought it's like, I'm going to go back and get a second degree in photography and make this my career. And while I was out there, I ran into this couple, Dan and Janine Patitucci, which they had lived in California for a while, and they're big name. I mean, that's like the big time of the outdoor industry photography. They do all the stuff for like the North Face and Patagonia and that kind of stuff. And they actually had dropped out of school to do this. Like they dropped out of photo school. And I was like,
that's encouraging.
Yeah, I was like, that's encouraging because I think I don't really want to run out of photography school with even more student debt. So I kind of did the same thing and just started shooting. And just through sheer luck, I ended up photographing this race out in Utah back in, it's like 2005 or 6, called Primal Quest. And I ended up getting a very unique photo. I kind of saw where all the other photographers were headed and decided that if they were going that way, I should go the opposite direction because at least my photos will be different, if nothing else. And went out and got this really cool photo of all these racers. It's like an adventure race, kind of like Eco Challenge, that kind of thing. All these racers on horseback running across the desert as a helicopter dropped down in front of me. And I got this helicopter like up in the foreground of the photo with all these racers in the background. And this happened right at sunrise. And they end up winning a couple of contests with this. And it just happened to be at this event where the editor for National Geographic Traveler was there, and like everyone's trying to show him their photos and this kind of stuff. And somehow he saw mine and thought it was cool, and we kind of built up a connection there. And suddenly I got like a couple jobs from it as a result of that. So it's just a bunch of very fortunate coincidences, I guess, that kind of led into that.
Yeah, right. That sounds like my first reaction was like, oh yeah, right place at the right time. But
exactly. Yeah.
It's got to be so much more than that, because obviously, you weren't just in the right place at the right time. You made some smart decisions. You saw where other photographers were going. I don't want that exact same photo. I'm going to take a risk here and just see what happens. And obviously it paid out for you. So it was obviously so much more than just right place at the right time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think so. And I think that's kind of been the focus of my, my career, my business, and my kind of philosophy of photography. Especially I did a lot of landscape photography in the past. And I think as a landscape photographer, you're definitely drawn to duplicate what you see other photographers do. So, everyone goes out to Yosemite, and like, if you've ever been out there in the winter, like I went out there and shot with the black and white camera and tried to duplicate that famous Ansel Adams photo from the tunnel overlook there of the storms clearing the valley. And I think that's cool. And I don't think there's anything necessarily bad about doing it. But if you're just duplicating what you see other photographers do, it doesn't really kind of elevate you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's something to be said for just taking a risk and being a little different. So it's like, by all means, like, I would never try to discourage a new photographer from doing that, because I feel like it's a way that you learn technique and you do end up with cool photos. But if you want to take it to that next level, you really have to kind of, put yourself out there and be comfortable taking a little bit of risk and doing something completely different.
What would you say is the most, what's the most risky shot that you've ever taken, I guess? Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh no, it does. That's a really good question. I'd have to think about that for a little bit. I don't know if I've necessarily go out of my way to like take a ton of risk. In fact, I have this idea, especially now doing wedding photography, I have this idea that you can't just do those kind of photos. In reality, when you shoot a wedding, there's a lot of people that are vested in it, not just the couple, and certainly not just me as the photographer. So I'm not just shooting what I want to shoot. I'm not just shooting what the couple wants to shoot. I'm shooting what Uncle Bob wants to see and what Grandma and Grandpa want to see and that kind of stuff. So
Right.
There's a lot of safe photos that are involved in weddings. But then after you kind of get that safe shot, be like, how can I basically in the same moment change it up a little bit to make it my own? And I think that's what I do a lot. For example, I shot a wedding like a year or so ago, and the bride had this really, really pretty umbrella. And the first shot I got was just her kind of at sunset. It's illuminating her, and it's just this really nice warm light on her, and it was safe. It was like a nice photo. And then I went and just, without moving her, I ran around to the other side of her and shot through the umbrella and shot her silhouette from the sun, kind of leaving her silhouette on the inside of the umbrella.
Yeah.
So it was backlit, and I was like, that was for me. So the first shot was for Grandma and Grandpa. The second shot was for me. So it's not necessarily taking a big risk, because we've already gotten that established safe photo taken care of, like kind of check the box, and now I get to play a little bit. So I think that's to kind of answer your question without actually answering your question.
No. I think that definitely answered my question. I feel like there's a lot of times where when you're first starting out, you're trying to figure out poses or, something like that. And where you're going to look is whatever's going to captivate your eye is going to be the most, crazy shot, the most unique shot. But at the end of the day, it's still important to really take those safe shots and make sure that the couple is going to be happy with their photos before you kind of get this creative license to do whatever you want. Now, typically, obviously, they're going to love those artistic shots more, but it all depends on the time that you have. So getting those safe shots is super important.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not necessarily, when I first started out, maybe that playtime was maybe 5 or 10% of my time. I might shoot a wedding and I might take 1,000 photos, and maybe 20 of them were like, my interesting shots for me.
Right.
And now it's probably more like 60-40. Like I'm taking more photos for me because that's what my clients are looking for. I've established a style. But that doesn't come on day one. You kind of have to ease into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's incredible. That is so cool. I'm going to kind of go off here. So I get a lot of questions from beginner photographers who say, like, people are asking me to take photos that I don't want to take. They're asking me to take the photos that every other photographer takes. And here you are saying that, like, nope, these couples hire me for the photos that I take. How would you suggest somebody makes that transition?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a tough one, but I would suggest that photography is always a balance about between humility and ego a little bit. You have to have a little bit of both. And sometimes everyone gets asked to take photos that they don't necessarily want to take. I mean, that's if you're a wedding photographer, that's just part of the industry. My suggestion for new photographers is to not be resistant to that. Go for it. I mean, if that's what your client wants, I mean, we're all paid pretty good amount of money to be able to be part of these couples' days. If I would never say no to a client. If they wanted something,
right,
absolutely, I'm going to do that for them. But the difference is, as I've grown as a photographer over the last decade and a half or so, I've kind of developed my own style. And it's not that I get out there and say, I'm only shooting this particular style. Like, if you hire me, you get me, and that's it. And, it's not like that. But what I do is, when I'm putting images out, on my portfolio, on my website and that stuff, I'm putting out the images that I like. And people are hiring me because that's what they're seeing. So they're hiring me like, hey, we saw these photos on your website, and that's what we want at our wedding. So I don't get asked for as many of those things that I don't really like doing, if that makes sense.
That's a great tip. I think a lot of people are going to love to hear that, for sure, because nobody likes to be asked to do something that they don't want to do. So
it's true. Yeah.
I kind of want to go back a little bit. You talked about early on, you started off as, doing a lot of landscape photography. It really, I'm guessing that it called your name, shooting all these beautiful landscapes. Did you ever, I guess, like, get paid? Was it like an everyday type? Was that like a main source of income for you? Was landscape photography for a while?
For a little bit. So I have this kind of weird background. I was never really attracted to landscape photography. I was always attracted to just being in those places. I love hiking and mountain biking and backpacking. Like, if I can be outside traveling, like, that's heaven for me. And taking pictures really just started as a way for me to share that with other people. I kind of got into commercial photography and shooting stuff for magazines before I really started shooting stuff for me, if that makes sense. And it's
Yes.
kind of a a backwards way to get into it. It's pretty unusual. Like I fell into photography. It wasn't like a goal of mine to be a photographer. So the idea of like just being out at a cool location when the light is great. Some days I wouldn't even bother bringing the camera out, because I just wanted to be out there, and bringing all the gear with sometimes can be a distraction. But in 2007 now, 8, I opened a fine art photography gallery. So I featured some of my work, and then I would bring in other photographers and that kind of thing. And that lasted only about 4 years. And that was kind of in the middle. I was already doing some weddings at that point, but I started focusing on just selling the landscape. And it was a lot of fun. The downside is after we got to a certain level of call it like financial success, I realized that I was spending 70 or 80 hours a week sitting in a gallery, being a salesperson, and wasn't spending any time as a photographer and almost zero time as just someone who liked being outside. So it's kind of a catch-22. If you make it as a landscape photographer in some ways, it makes it really hard to spend time out in those landscapes.
Which was the whole reason why you started it.
Exactly. And then that's kind of where I was like, if I switch gears and focus on weddings and portraits, I still have a, intellectually and creatively rewarding job, and I still get to spend time outside.
There you go. So were you mainly selling your landscape photos to individual buyers, or were they publications or anything like that?
There's kind of two sides of it. So the landscape side was almost entirely to individual buyers.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, there just isn't a huge market for that. I mean, if you flip through any like big magazine, I mean, unless it's a photography magazine, you're not seeing a lot of landscape photography in there. Even in like, the real iconic publications like National Geographic and that kind of stuff, you tend to see it's more photos of people. And I did a lot of that. And it's the people photography that I was able to sell to publications and that kind of thing, more than, pure landscapes.
Of course. Yeah, I guess where I was trying to get at was a lot of people do wonder about landscapes. A lot of people just, that's where their passion is. Like you said, they love spending time outdoors. Hey, if I bring my camera, it'd be awesome if I got a cool shot or two. And then after a while, people start to wonder, I wonder if I could make a few dollars out of this, But it's interesting to hear that, out of major publications, it can be very hard to just sell landscapes. So selling it to individuals is probably the best route to go.
Yeah, and in reality, if you think about it, most photographers could probably name, no more than 4 or 5 landscape photographers that they really admire. And those are probably the 4 or 5 that are making a living at it.
Right, or dead.
Or dead. Yeah, exactly. It's not an easy field to make a living at, and I think if that's your goal, it's not enough to be in the top 5%. You need to be in the top, 0.5%
Oh, geez.
I mean, you really got to be like 1 in 10,000.
Right. Right.
To be kind of making money as a landscape photographer, because they're just frankly they're few and far between, and most of the big landscape photographers you've probably heard of are doing it as a second career for the most part. They've had some kind of career in investment banking or something, and then decided in their 50s they want to be a landscape photographer. So
and suddenly they have the time and the capital to just say, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and just hope for the best.
Well, exactly. And you know what? And I don't. If you're into landscape photography and you like being outside, like you just got to appreciate that for what it is. Like, be a great artist and spend time in the outdoors. But when you try to commercialize that, that's pretty tough.
Yeah, I bet. So can you kind of walk me through, you said that by the time that you had opened up your fine art gallery, you were already kind of shooting some weddings. You want to talk me through the transition of how you went from shooting landscapes to getting into weddings? Yeah,
that's all right. So that's actually a pretty simple one. It happened when I started in Illinois. That's where I grew up. And then I moved to Colorado in about 2004. And I'd never considered myself as a wedding photographer. I never even thought about the idea, because growing up in Illinois, weddings meant you get married in a church and then have a reception in either the church basement a stuffy reception hall or some poorly lit restaurant. I mean, that was the formula, right? Coming out to Colorado is totally different. Like outdoor weddings, like people out here are just, they seem to be a lot more creative. Things were outside, and I got to incorporate that landscape photography that I enjoyed into weddings. So I went from thinking, I had one idea about what wedding photography was. Then when I came out here, I realized could be something completely different. And that was pretty much the transition. Once I realized that I could shoot weddings and not be cooped up inside all day, then I got kind of really excited about the idea. And since then, I've just done such cool weddings where people are skiing. I've done weddings that were like mountain bike themed. I just photographed one a couple weeks ago. They got married in Beaver Creek at the ski area, and everything was just covered in fresh snow, and there was the stream running through where they got married. So it's like little waterfalls in between boulders and stuff, like right at their wedding site. So
oh wow,
yeah. So it's this. It totally blew my mind about what wedding photography could be.
So. Where did the first wedding come from? Did you start actively marketing for weddings once you moved to Colorado and saw how beautiful it was, or did somebody come to you and ask?
No. I think I start the way like most wedding photographers do. It's like you got a friend that's getting married, and they don't have much of a budget, and they're like, "Hey, can you photograph my wedding?" And I was like, I will probably screw the whole thing up because I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never photographed a wedding before. And they're like, "Well, we're not paying you, so that's okay." And I was like, "Oh, well, that's a good point. I mean, I guess you're going to get what you pay for." So, so honestly, like the first wedding I photographed was a friend's. I just shot it for him, and I was like, it's like you probably should hire someone who knows what they're doing, but I'd be happy to shoot him. They ended up just going with me, and I shot it for him, and gave him a CD. We were using CDs way back in the day. And then like the next time a friend got married, I think he paid me like $100. And after a year, I had shot like 4 weddings, and I was up to like $500, which was like, great money when you're first starting out. And then after like a year or two of that, of kind of doing this on the side, then it started to get a little bit more serious, and I started to consider it as a legit form of business, I guess.
That is hilarious. What did you have in mind for that first wedding? Did you try to research past weddings or how they're shot, or did you just say, we're doing this however I think this should be done, we're going to see what happens?
It was an Illinois wedding, so it's like pretty routine by the books. And I remember, I had just gotten married, I think maybe a year or two prior. So I was trying to think of what our photographer had done and basically just try to emulate that. And I mean, in all honesty, that first wedding, all I was hoping was I could get photos that were, properly exposed and in focus. I didn't have any grand ideas about, we're going to create these like amazing artistic shots. I think we did get a couple that were pretty nice, but, mainly just, hey, if we can get exposure and focus, let's just nail that, and we'll see what happens.
We'll go from there. So how long ago was that, would you say? How many years ago?
Let's see. He's got kids in high school now, so it's got to be pushing about 15, 16 years.
Okay, so you've been shooting weddings for a long time.
Yeah, relatively speaking, yeah.
Okay, so when I found you, the way that I found your website is you had a page that says that you offer something that I don't think I've never seen another wedding photographer offer this, but everybody's heard of this, the 100% money back guarantee. And the second that I saw that, I thought either one, this guy is super confident in his work, or two, this guy's just waiting to go out of business, right? The more that I looked at your work, the more that I looked into your photos, I thought, well, this guy knows his photography. He clearly has some idea of what he's doing. I got to talk to him. So you have to tell me, where did this idea to offer 100% money back guarantee come from? Because I love it.
Cool. All right. So funny thing, I actually stole this idea from a retail business. So I don't know if you've ever heard of REI. They're like an outdoor store, and like I'm really involved in the outdoors. And for the last like 80 years, they had this. And I don't know, I think they might have toned it back a little bit, but they've had they're famous for their very liberal return policy. The idea that if you're not completely happy with something you bought there, they'll give you a refund, or at least, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. So maybe it's a store credit or repair, replace the product or whatever it was. But I got to thinking about that, and I was like, wow. I was like, so there's this company that is so confident that if they sell you a pair of socks that you don't like, they'll give you your money back. And yet here's an industry with wedding photography. I mean, we are charging couples thousands of dollars to photograph one of the most important days of their life. I mean, it's for most of my clients, like their photography budget is like the single biggest line item on their wedding budget.
Especially with having more outdoor weddings.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking it's so funny that a retail store can make such a, kind of impressive guarantee, but as wedding photographers, we don't offer something like that to our clients. And I started thinking about that, and then wondering what would happen if I had a client that was truly upset with their photography. What would happen if someone came back to me, and knock on wood, it hasn't happened yet, but what if someone came up to me and was like, we got our wedding photos and we just didn't like them. And I wouldn't want them to have to pay for that. It seems to me that it's like being like, hey, if you don't like it, why are you paying me all this money? And it almost seemed weird that I had never found another photographer that was doing an offer like this. And it almost seemed weird to me that no one else was.
Yes.
Because we are asking couples to trust us to capture one of the most important days in their lives. And they're extending us a ton of trust. I mean, most, my clients pay in advance. They put down a down payment and then they pay the balance like before their wedding. So I have all their money, and they're counting on me to deliver photos that take their breath away. And I was like, well, what guarantee can I give them? I'm asking them to give me all this trust, and I wanted to have something in place so that I can extend the same thing to them. They're trusting me. I want them to, I want to show them that I trust them too, if that makes sense.
So this is incredible. That is so important too. Just like you said, the trust that you have between you and your couples is so important, because oftentimes, I tell my brides this, and nobody ever thinks about it until the words are said, but it's like, I might be with you on your wedding day more than you will your new husband, right? So
absolutely, right?
I'm going to be spending that time with you. I'm going to be spending time with the people who you're inviting to your wedding are your closest friends and family, so that you feel most comfortable on your wedding day. And this stranger, right? The photographer. So anything that you can do to build that trust is going to just make your photos so much better. And I've often thought about this. How can I build more trust? What can I do to build more trust? And the 100% money back guarantee is genius. But I think we're just playing devil's advocate here. People are photographers. They're going to get worried, right? Because if they're REI, you look at REI, hundreds of thousands of employees, thousands and thousands of products, very much lower cost. Somebody returns some socks, no big deal to their bottom line. So were you worried before you implemented this that you're going to go broke and out of business and have to sell your house and just give up?
No. Well, there of course there was a little bit of fear. I mean, it definitely felt like a risk, but I wasn't worried that I was going to go broke and have to sell the house and that. I mean, honestly, when I put this in, I was like, well, worst case scenario, everyone this year tells me they hate their photos, and I give them all their money back, and I'm out of business. But then again, if
you just say that so lightly. Worst case, I go broke, I'm out of business.
But if everybody hates their photos, I should be out of business. I mean, I shouldn't be in business.
That's a very good point.
If my clients all hate their photos like that, that's kind of the other way to look at it. And that's where that trust thing comes from. It's like, but I mean, in all honesty, yeah, there was some, trepidation of what happens if people try to take advantage of this. So, I mean, I did set in, or, create some kind of, fine print and fail safes to it and that kind of thing. So it's not like they can get all their photos and get like their digital downloads and their album and a bunch of prints and then decide they want their money back. So they do have to make that decision when they look at the initial proofs. So it's, at least I'm not like on the hook for, my $500 or $600 album from a polka, and then have them tell me they want their money back.
Or like 5 years later, you know what? Actually, we decided that we don't like your wedding photography.
Yeah, so I thought about that. So I mean, there is like, there's a little bit of risk, but there's ways to mitigate it. But everything I kind of did was built on the idea that if they're genuinely not happy with the work that I did, I don't want them to have to pay for it. I think that's just maybe that's bad business, but I think it's being a decent person, if that makes sense.
I think it's totally fair. I think that it's definitely being a decent person, for sure. Do you do any sort of like screening process? Because technically, I mean, anybody could come up to you and say, hey, I want your wedding photography, knowing that they would immediately, just say, we didn't like it, give us our money back.
No, I mean, I'm feeling, now that you said that, now you got me worried. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, there's not much of a screening process. And, honestly, I could imagine some people, you could imagine a situation where someone might come up and they're going to, give you the money and then, screenshot all the images off the proof site so they have a copy of everything and then ask for their money back. And if that happened, I guess I would still give them their money back. I'd be a little disappointed and might have to rethink this, but I've been doing it now for 2 or 3 years. I didn't start off this way. No, it's never come up, and I imagine it could. But again, it's kind of that trust thing we were talking about. It's I generally trust that most people are good people and would never go out to like intentionally scam someone.
I think that's the best way to look at society, and that just the whole human race. It's the best way to just kind of go about your life too, right? Just kind of assume that everybody has the best intentions in mind, and then if something else comes up, then you just deal with it then. Would you say that the majority of your weddings that you shoot are destination weddings, or are they local couples to you?
It's about I can't. I'm trying to think of a price. So I basically have three types of clients. I have the full-on destination wedding, and that could be here in Colorado, or it could be me going someplace else. Like I shot some weddings in Hawaii last year, Illinois. We're talking about doing one out on the East Coast this summer. So those are like the kind of the legit full-on destination weddings. And then we've got a lot of folks that come up from Denver, which is about 100 miles from here. It's down in the we call it the Front Range, the plains there, and they'll come up into the mountains for a wedding. And then we've got the so it's like kind of a destination wedding, but I mean they're not going across the world. And then we've got people that like live here, and I'm trying to think what the percentages are. It's probably about a third.
I guess where I was getting at was, do you get a chance to meet most of your couples before you photograph them so that you can get an idea of their intentions?
Gotcha. And I don't. No, and they don't get a chance to meet me either. So I kind of look at it as, again, I don't have a studio space anymore because I'm mostly focused on destination weddings. So if people do want to meet me, we just grab coffee at like a coffee shop or go out to a bar or something like that. So I don't have that, quote unquote legitimacy of a storefront, like a brick and mortar store. So, and I'm not a very cheap photographer up here either. So I'm asking people to put a lot of faith in me. And this is just that one little way that I can try to, return that.
I love that. I love that whole philosophy. I've thought about doing the 100% money back guarantee for a long time, but I think it's just that I don't know that it's just scary to think about. But it's really good to hear from a photographer who has done it for a few years and luckily hasn't had any issues yet. And like you said, I mean, if everybody comes back and claims it, well, then maybe you shouldn't be in business anyway. So that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
On your website, this is kind of unrelated. On your website, you list all your gear, so we don't have to go into that too much. But you do list that you have an infrared converted 20D, which I think is super cool. But it for people who don't know, like in a camera, there is the filter that lets all the colors come through, all the light colors come through. And when you convert a camera to infrared, it only allows infrared light to come through, which is great for like astrophotography. Is that the main use for it?
A variety of different stuff. So, excuse me. It's good for astrophotography. I'm trying to think. It's probably got other like scientific uses. Yes. I just think. I mean, I'm sure there's like legit uses for it. I just think it looks cool.
It does. I see it for a lot of landscape photos, right? It makes beautiful, very contrasty skies, and trees are like white some reason, and they're just incredible. And I want to know, how are you using this thing at weddings? Like, do you ever think before a wedding, like, oh, I know exactly what shot I want to get with the 20D?
I do, actually, if I know the venue pretty well. You know, and it depends, because it doesn't work very well in the winter because the snow comes out black.
Oh, wow.
It comes out a little weird. But yeah, if I know I'm going to be in a situation where I'm going to have some green grass and blue skies to deal with, maybe some clouds, like I'll bring that out and get 4 or 5 shots on that. I don't do it at every single wedding. It really depends, especially with destination weddings, because I'm limited with how much gear I can carry. But if I have room for it, I bring that, and sometimes I'll do a couple shots and they don't come out because it's really unpredictable how that's going to look. But I think it's cool. I've got maybe a couple dozen photos with that camera that have just been like award winners, like really cool. Which is funny because that camera is now, man, it's got to be over a decade old.
Oh yeah, the 20D.
I think it came out 8 megapixels. Yeah.
Forever ago, I feel like the little 1.5-inch screen.
Oh yeah, it's so funny. It's like, wow, it's like, this reminds me of using like a flip phone back in the 90s. You know, it's like this tiny little postage stamp size screen on there.
So when you say that the snow turns out black, is that, I guess, do wedding dresses turn out black? Does it have to do with the color or light reflectancy? Well, I'm not even sure.
Yeah, well, 2 things. If anything gives off a little bit of heat, it's going to look brighter in there. So that's why like blue skies look so dark. 'Cause that blue sky, you're getting a lot of it's blue because you're kind of scattering the light in the atmosphere into like kind of the blue and ultraviolet spectrum. But so it gets really dark in the infrared end of things.
Well, I'm gonna have to check that out. That sounds like a ton of fun. But like you said, unpredictable and, you know, high risk, high reward. And that's definitely my motto. And that sounds exactly right up infrared's alley. Knowing what you know now, what is one thing that you wish you knew about photography sooner? From
the artistic side, I wish when I first started, I just had a better understanding of lighting. And I don't mean like high-end, you know, lighting, like bringing out the strobe kits and all that stuff. I just mean like the directionality and the shape and how different types of light can affect people differently. You know, I was probably shooting weddings for 2 or 3 years before someone told me to, you know, if you have a single light source, put, you know, and you have like a bride and groom, put the groom in between the bride and the light so that the light is kind of shining into the bride's face. Like, and now it's like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's second nature, but I was like, wow, that would have made a lot of my photos a lot better. But you know, little things like that, just understanding lighting and directionality, I think would have just been, made my days a lot easier.
How would you recommend people starting out go ahead and learn about lighting?
Well, nowadays, which we didn't have when I was starting, I mean, you have things like YouTube and like podcasts like yours. So there's just so many like cool resources out there. There's still something to be said for picking up a book on art starting in, you know, 1600s and just understanding classical portrait lighting. It really hasn't changed much in 500 years. I mean, good lighting is good light.
I mean, that's why we still have the Rembrandt technique, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Rembrandt lighting, I mean, I still use that, especially for my like male subjects. I mean, it's just such an easy classical lighting technique, and it looks so good.
Always looks so good. Always looks so good. Well, Tim, I really want to be conscious of your time, so I don't want to take up too much. Can you tell the listeners anywhere where they can find you online?
Sure. I'm on all the usual stuff. I've got my own website, timothyfaust.com. I've got Facebook. I think it's just facebook.com/Timothy Faust Photography, probably. Instagram, all the usual suspects there.
Well, I will be sure to list all of your social channels in the show notes so that if anybody wants to check you out, they can check them out there and not have to pull over on the side of the road right now and start writing this stuff down so that they can go for it. Oh, you know what? Before we leave, I noticed on your website you talked a little bit about offering workshops as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, if just in case any of the listeners are interested?
Yeah, I do a few workshops. I used to do a lot more. These days, I do maybe one a year. We haven't set anything up for 2017 yet, but I teach photography at the local college here. And before being a photographer, I was a high school teacher. So teaching is kind of a secondary passion of mine. So I do like to offer workshops maybe once a year, give or take.
And do you do those local, or do you travel for those, or?
It depends. We try to come up with something new every year and change it up a bit. So we've done them in Utah, we've done them locally here, but mainly, kind of Colorado, Wyoming, Utah area.
So if anybody's interested, they're just going to have to keep an eye out on the website and just keep checking back?
Sign up for our newsletter.
There you go. Perfect. All right. Well, Tim, thank you again so much for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed listening to you, and I can't wait to hear about your next workshop. I'm excited.
Great. Thanks, Raymond. I appreciate it.
What did you guys think about that episode? Holy cow. When I first found Timothy and saw that he was giving a 100% money back guarantee, it blew my mind, right? But really, is that such a bad idea? I mean, if you're confident in your photography, you're confident in your workflows, you're confident in the service that you provide, why is that so bad, right? Like, if you're not offering a 100% money back guarantee, maybe you just don't have the confidence in yourself, right? Sure, maybe some people, you're thinking might take advantage of you. But for a huge purchase like wedding photography is, or even, it could work better for family photography. If you deliver a service that anybody is going to want to talk about, there's no way that they're going to ask for their money back, because they're truly going to enjoy your services. And that's it. That's what Timothy said, right? So let me know if you're thinking about, trying to work that in somehow, trying to figure out what you could do into your business to increase leads or improve the amount of trust that your clients have in you. I would love to hear about it. Again, head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com, check out the show notes for this episode, and you know what? I'm going to add Timothy to the brand new Facebook group. So all that you got to do is if you click on the link to join the Facebook group, and then you can ask Timothy your questions there. I'm sure that he's going to be more than happy to help out and answer any questions that you have. So guys, again, check that out. That's at beginnerphotographypodcast.com, the show notes. I can't wait to see you guys there. And that's it. Until next week, keep shooting and just go out, have some fun. Later.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Be sure to join the conversations on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want any links or resources we talked about in today's episode, check out the show notes at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. See you again next week.